Hi, my name's Eliza Cotton. I would like to start by paying respect to the past, present and emerging traditional custodians and elders of the Kulin Nation where I'm speaking to you from today, and extend that respect to any First Nations people listening in. I would also like to acknowledge that sovereignty over this continent was never ceded, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And I thank the Boonwurrung people for caring for this beautiful country for thousands of years. Perhaps if you would like to pop in the chat the country from which you're coming today, and we can all have a look. But today I would like to talk to you a bit about my master's thesis research on the retirement of Australia's federal parliamentarians, which I was lucky enough to have supervised by the Honourable Dr. Sharman Stone at Monash University. In the presentation today, I'd like to firstly provide a bit of context about the research, followed by an outline of some of the key quantitative data, where I found that women parliamentarians leave younger after fewer years than men. And I will then address some key themes that arose in the qualitative analysis, including the differing experiences between mothers and fathers in Parliament. So most of the existing research and policy in this field I was delving into of women's political empowerment and participation was aimed at either increasing the likelihood that women would be pre-selected or elected into Parliament, or on the gendered nature of the parliamentary workforce and the experiences of women in this place. But what I found to be missing was really tangible evidence on the outcomes of these two research areas. And while there had been anecdotes in the news media in the last 5 years or so from parliamentarians such as Kelly O'Dwyer, Kate Ellis, Tim Hammond, and Richard Di Natale, who had all publicly cited caregiving and family as key to their decision to retire, there didn't seem to be significant academic research on the intersection between political participation, parenthood, and retirement. So I wanted to ask these key questions. Are the numbers of women elected routinely reduced by the frequency at which they retire? Does parenthood impact parliamentary retirement? And if so, what does this mean for existing mechanisms that aim to improve gender diversity in the Parliament? So right off the bat, I wanted to address some key questions that I really grappled with myself throughout this process, these being why parliamentarians and why this workforce of the federal Parliament. Both men and women parliamentarians do hold a certain power and privilege in our society, so why focus our attention on them? And what I've got here on the slides is obviously a very crude account of very significant research done in this field. But essentially what I want to hone in on is that greater gender diversity and inclusion amongst parliamentarians not only ensures that women achieve workplace equity, which is their human right, but has also been found to foster a wealth of benefits to the communities in which that parliament serves. So some of these benefits include increased consideration of social welfare policy issues, reduced corruption, improvement to the public service, and support for more peaceful and less violent societies. And yet, as we can see here, Australia's global ranking of women elected to Parliament and women in ministerial positions is woefully low and far below that of many other OECD nations. So I undertook quite a significant data collection of all of the parliamentarians who had either retired, resigned, or chose not to recontest their seats between the years of 1990 to 2019. The sample totaled 336 parliamentarians. From this cohort, I collected data on their ages at retirement, their gender, length of service, location of their electorate, their party, and the reasons they provided for retirement, sourced from valedictory speeches or news media from the time of their departure. I was also very lucky to have interviews with 14 former and current parliamentarians. The first key finding I uncovered was that women are, as hypothesised, retiring more than men. Looking here at figure 1, we can see that from the 39th Parliament, which began in 1999, to the present, we have seen a steady increase in the proportion of women in Parliament. So that's in blue. And at the same time, the proportion of women retiring has increased by an average of 2.94% each Parliament. By comparison, retirement amongst men increased by only 0.53% each Parliament, despite the gradual decrease in men elected as the Parliament approaches gender parity. So I was quite perturbed, I suppose, when I was met with this finding, as significant scholarship in this space has found increased gender representation can change a parliament's institutional culture and thus potentially lead to better environments for women parliamentarians to work and thrive. And this is found in the corporate world as well. And yet, my research was telling me that women were leaving now more than ever, despite there being more women in Parliament than ever before. I had initially thought that perhaps combining the senators and the representatives might have been the cause for this discrepancy, as women in the Senate have held a critical mass of 30% of the seats since the 40th Parliament in 2002, while the House of Reps has only 25 at that time and has grown at a much slower rate. However, as we can see here in Figure 3, the retirements amongst women in the Senate do not follow a pattern of decline. Furthermore, since 2002, women in the Senate have averaged only marginally lower retirement rates each parliamentary term than her colleagues in the House of Reps. Looking now at the ages parliamentarians left, we can see in Figure 4 that women were almost 5 times as likely to leave before the age of 40 and almost twice as likely to retire before the age of 50 than men were. These younger departure ages we can see amongst women are also the years they are most likely to be birthing and raising their children if they do choose to be mothers. Retiring women are overrepresented amongst parliamentarians with fewer years served. So retiring men are found to be more than twice as likely to sustain a career of 20 years or more in the Parliament than retiring women. Furthermore, only 1 or 1.3% of women retirees in the 1990 to 2019 timeframe achieved a parliamentary career longer than 23 years, unlike 12% of men. Fewer years of service and the younger departure ages of women parliamentarians is likely to affect their ability to take on promotion, for example, ministerial positions or other leadership roles, if they do not have the career longevity required generally to attain such responsibility. I also found that while women in the Labor Party are less likely to retire than those in the Liberal Party, the difference is fairly slim. And there has been no real decrease to women's retirements from the Labor Party since 1990. Therefore, the Labor Party prides itself on having specific policies and procedures to support gender parity. However, these systems don't appear to have any discernible impact on the retirement of women from their party. A picture was forming from the quantitative data set answering the who and what questions around parliamentary retirement in Australia, while the possible why questions were answered through interrogation of interviews, news media, and valedictory speeches. They were found, through that analysis, we found that stresses implicating parliamentary retirement generally fell into 3 key clusters. Firstly, caregiving and family. This included the need to provide care for dependents, wanting to spend more time with their families or feeling as though their families were suffering unduly because of their work. It would lead parliamentarians to the conclusion that their expertise and passions could be better utilised in a different workforce. A sense of disillusionment and a feeling as though it was simply time to move on were also key, but today I'll be focusing on the first. If anyone is interested in the latter two, please do get in touch. The cluster of caregiving and family was the most common cause of retirement amongst women parliamentarians retiring in early to mid-career. Just under 1/3 of retiring parliamentarians cited as such, while only 15% of men did. Responses from interviewees who were mothers mostly reflected the values and norms of Australian society, which tend to predominantly assign the child caring roles to women. They all had stories of fatigue, feeling flustered or bereft when negotiating competing demands from their party and constituencies, whilst grappling with themselves about the right way to be a good mother. Interviewees emphasised feeling the weight of expectations on them in both roles. And I feel as though this sentiment that I got from most of the mothers I interviewed is really aptly summarised by the quote I have here from Kirsten Livermore. She said to me, "You've got these expectations on yourself about the kind of mother you'll be, what family life should look like. We were doing it. We were all managing it. We were doing fine. But I had these expectations of myself and family life, and I didn't feel they were being fulfilled." And when she refers to it here, she's talking about the work of a parliamentarian. Later in our interview, she went on to cogitate asking her past self, could I actually fit my family into what I feel this life demands of me, this life in Parliament? Well, no, I don't think I can. And this conflict ended her career in Parliament. When I asked Anna Burke if she felt she had experienced burnout, she replied, "Oh, totally," saying that negotiating caregiving and parliamentary work was a recipe for people saying, "I can't do this. I'm going to retire and get out of here." Analysis of women's media and valedictory statements similarly found themes that were brought out in the interviewees' responses. Women who cited caregiving and family upon retirement commonly refer to the complications they were personally experiencing, trying to balance their caregiving roles with the role of a parliamentarian. Jacinta Collins says she was keen to pursue a better work and family balance, while Kate Lundy recounted her routine of racing home for an hour sleep, get up, get the children to school, and do it again. In reference to her weaning her baby off breastfeeding, Jackie Kelly stated, "It was all, I suppose, very traumatic, and work dictated when things occurred." These women were worn thin from working incredibly hard to negotiate their paid and unpaid labour roles, and this led to their retirement in early to mid-career. I noticed quite a different narrative arising from retiring men who cited caregiving and family, and this was one of apologies and absence. These men admitted that their careers placed great onus on their partners, who upheld the family unit while they were away performing parliamentary duties. While the men were highly likely to be saddened by being away from home, their spouse and children for extended periods, they were much less likely to refer to the tangible struggle in performing both carer roles and paid labour roles than women were. The societal attitudes in Australia are as such that they could generally rely on a spouse or other support to undertake unpaid work. However, there are men entering Parliament who are seeking to adopt some of the caring responsibilities that these men are experiencing some of the same difficulties that blight the careers of their mother colleagues. I won't go into all of these quotes, although I'm happy to send through the slides if anyone is interested, but I will quickly mention the first quote here from Chris Cruther, who, similarly to the women I interviewed, could foresee that he wouldn't be able to juggle the work he was doing with the role he wanted to perform as a dad to his 2 young children without burning out in the near future. One of the most significant themes arising in over half of interviews was the difficulty of travel. However, I found no relationship between the location of a parliamentarian's electorate and the frequencies at which they retire. Being from a regional area or from an electorate with a difficult access to Canberra didn't make a parliamentarian any more likely to retire. Instead, retirement was predicated on the time available to a parliamentarian to balance hours in transit with other duties that they have to uphold. And this is why I wanted to mention the data on travel here, because it really didn't make a difference. A significant difference if you were based in Melbourne or Western Australia, but it did make a difference if you were a parliamentarian who had other responsibilities which required their time and presence at home, namely dependent children. So the travel made it very hard to be an active parent and increased fatigue and symptoms of burnout. Qualitative analysis found that caregivers are presented with few viable options to actively participate in our nation's democracy, whilst maintaining the socially reinforced depiction of who they wish to be as a parent. And there are inadequate systems and procedures to alleviate this strain on this balance. Current policies remain entrenched in masculine traditions and practices that dominated in the design of Australia's parliament back in Federation. Additionally, as my research presents a major concern regarding the futility of mechanisms that aim to increase gender parity through election and pre-selection processes. Gender parity in the Parliament, as well as women's ability to procure career advancement in the Parliament, is not likely to be realised if those specially recruited end up retiring in early to mid-career. So it is about consolidation, not just acceleration. I would therefore suggest that mechanisms must also be introduced to support the retention of younger parliamentarians. specifically caregivers and women, to build towards greater inclusion and diversity. My research suggests that if we really want to see women's representation in Australia's federal parliament, we need policy reform to enhance accessibility for caregivers. While the unique qualities of the Australian Parliament mean that policies in other workplaces, such as maternity leave and the like, are not easily implemented, this does not mean that change is not possible. Many people, including some of my interviewees, cling to the traditions of Parliament and are mostly unimaginative of what it could be like in that place. But change could take many forms. For example, online communication methods could be incorporated to make parliamentarians' work more flexible, possibly beginning with online video calls from interstate meetings. And infrastructure made necessary by COVID could help facilitate this change. Parliamentary daily proceedings could be reviewed in order to eliminate time lost in ineffectual and arcane activities. This could also allow for a more family-friendly schedule to occur, such as sitting weeks beginning on a Tuesday, allowing parliamentarians to commute on a Monday. So you don't need more time, you just need more effective management. Some of the unique qualities of this workplace also have the potential to make caregiving and working much more achievable for parenting parliamentarians. For example, parliamentarians generally organise their own schedules outside of sitting weeks, but interviewees were concerned that taking time out would hinder their career prospects and be looked at poorly by colleagues. Similarly, allowances are provided, but interviewees were wary to utilise them for fear doing so would be weaponised by political rivals and the media. Entitlements do not need to be considerably greater, but they do need to be reprioritised to account for the needs of increasingly diverse people elected. However, an institutional culture shift led by the executive leadership in all political parties would be required to combat this highly competitive, to the point of toxic environment that then implicates onto caregivers. These are just a few of the host of changes that could support parliamentarian service beyond early to mid-career, without their caregiving responsibilities causing early departure. Further inquiry into these areas could encourage greater participation in the Australian democracy through equitable workplace career progression in the Parliament and increased gender parity. Thank you all so much for listening, and feel free to get in touch. I would love to hear from you, and enjoy the other presentations.
Hi, Eliza. Thank you so much. That was really interesting and feels very topical at the moment. We have a couple of questions in the chat, if you're happy for me to pose them to you. So Caitlin has said, did the women parliamentarians talk about how much of their dissatisfaction with the work-life balance was coming from men questioning their competence and lack of structural or systemic support?
Yeah, sure. So just reading the question, sorry. They did a little bit, yes. So we had women parliamentarians who were mothers specifically talking about not necessarily men, but actually came from both men and women from their own parties, talking about how their mothering roles was going to implicate the party itself and what that meant for the party and their long-term goals. So I found from most mother parliamentarians that they felt they had to kind of choose between their party allegiance, which oftentimes they had been kind of committed to this party since, you know, teenagehood through volunteering and things, and they felt they had to kind of negotiate how that played out when then they became mothers and had dependents. So I would say that it did come from men questioning their competence, but it also came from women a lot. And in this kind of very competitive nature, especially if we're talking about gender quotas, even sometimes women found that other women were I suppose more combative, perhaps.
Really interesting. We have another question from Talaska, who said, well done on the excellent research, to which I agree. They've said, I'm interested in when you mentioned the unique qualities of the Parliament workplace. What do you think are the key differences between the Parliament and other industry workplaces?
Yeah, sure. This is a good one because I find it kind of quite complicated. It's very similar and it's very different in a lot of ways. And I suppose I kind of think back to an interview with Kirsten Livermore where she was talking about her friend who was a partner in a major law firm, and they would have conversations between each other about kind of the demands of the roles. But Kirsten at least felt like her role as a parliamentarian wanted a lot more from her personally, and it was asking her from both her constituents and her own party and her political enemies. Like she spoke of a lot of nastiness that I think her friend in law didn't feel. And she compared it to, which I really love this quote, that law was maybe like a set piece battle, whereas she felt she was in guerrilla warfare. So I think that really aptly summarizes it. And then because she's feeling as though her resources are being drained because she's constantly on the defense about kind of like the political dialogue, especially in the media. That then when she was also raising small children, then I suppose that kind of led to this sense of burnout, which is, I think, unique to Parliament in that you're voted in and people expect a lot from you as their elected person. Another thing that I find to be quite unique is that aspect of being voted in. So it's very hard to expect a parliamentarian to take time out for caregiving in their maybe 3 to 6 year term if they have been voted in and they've said, yes, I'm going to serve you for this time. And a lot of them actually didn't want to step out. They were passionate about the work. They felt like they were being making change or could make change in the future. And they didn't want to let their party or electorate down. But they also wanted to be able to be active mothers. So I think that kind of the voting in aspect of the role is also quite unique and a real challenge. But like I mentioned, there was a few notes about how their workplace can really offer some opportunities in that they have a lot of flexibility if they choose to take it. So I think that kind of leads into where change could occur about cultural shifts in terms of allowing people to take on the opportunities that are offered to them.
Yeah, it sounds very, very complex. We have another question from Ray, who said, I wonder how you think your sensible suggestions for change would be received in the context of what seems to be a hyper-masculine ecosystem.
Yeah, it's really challenging, I've found. And when I was speaking to my interviewees, a lot of them would discuss all of these kind of quite horrific sometimes circumstances that they were put under. And then when I would ask them, you know, what do we do? They were lost. Like they often were quite unimaginative because of the kind of very entrenched cultures, and the traditions in Parliament are quite extreme, like little symbolic things along the way, which really, I think, ties into this kind of structure that is quite unshakable in a lot of ways. And then when you think about the people making the decisions, the executive teams, the institutions as they are now benefit those people. So why would they change? So yeah, hard to make sensible suggestions about how we make change in this system. But I think that, I mean, gender parity or like getting more women in will help. And hopefully some of those changes I had in the last few slides will help too. And then having more kind of open dialogue, I think, between women and men and women between each other about how they can go about making changes. I mean, it's hard. Probably not a very good answer.
No, it's very informative. It's definitely a very complex problem, and we're all looking for those solutions. We have time for just one more question. So Lara has said, were there any comments about a masculinist culture and bullying, as these have been cited recently in the press?
Yeah, sure. I think I touched on it a little bit in relation to Caitlin's question about kind of almost this bullying about making decisions to care for your children. And maybe not so much as bullying, but definitely this kind of messaging happening that maybe you shouldn't make those decisions to be an active mother. But in relation to bullying more broadly. I did find that a lot. I didn't speak about it as much in this presentation because I found that it was more under this disillusionment header that I kind of came under, which was very connected to parenthood. But yes, people did find that bullying was a real issue for them in the Parliament, but maybe not so much in relation to the parenthood aspect.
Great, thank you so much. We're going to wrap it up there so that we can head out for our next session. But thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Eliza. That was very informative. And I look forward to seeing everyone at the midday keynote.
Thank you so much for your questions.
Thanks, guys.